Nell Watson is here. And Nell, if I could, are you here on the screen yet, or could you unmute yourself?
I am here. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well.
Good. Can you
How are
see
you
me?
doing? Hold on. I got about 17 things. Oh, yes, there you are. How you
Hello
doing?
there. Good, thank you. Glad to be
All
here.
right. All
Good
right.
to see you as well,
So,
Patrick. It's been a while.
yes. Oh, I know. I know. So Nell has joined us from the UK. Uh, so she's so we met at Singularity University many years ago. Um, she's now working at the nexus of AI safety and of AI ethics, um, and she's been doing that for many years, developing a range of frameworks. Um, you've spoken at the UN, so frameworks and safeguards. Excuse me, um, and and spending a lot of time with government research and technical advancements as well. Um, and one thing I know is she's written a book that's just out called "Taming the Machine," and she has a book coming out called "Safer Agentic AI." So um, Nell, glad to have you here. Um, I'm interested in what you have to say. Uh, your the topic is going to be um, I don't know. Is it a bit scary, the topic, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it could be. It's
Okay.
a mixed bag, but I'm cautiously optimistic, and hopefully by the end, you'll feel the same. So
Okay.
let's
Good.
um let's get stuck into it.
All right.
So as Patrick mentioned, I do a lot of work at the intersection of engineering, philosophy, and policy. And I've been thinking a little bit about the systemic effects of AI upon human beings, and indeed vice versa, our effects upon the psychology, as it were, of machines. And so today, with this view of looking at compassion in relation to AI, compassion to ourselves, potentially compassion to machines as well, I'd like to dig into this. So to begin with, I'd like to go in a rather strange direction, and that is to the Australian continent, where they have these beautiful beetles called the jewel beetle. And they're called the jewel beetle because they have a very shiny back, and their carapace is something that they take a lot of pride in. And ecologists in Australia were trying to work out why these poor beetles were dying out. And they looked at, pollution, things like pesticides, etc. Nothing seemed to add up. And then they discovered that actually it was due to human activity, but not in the way that they had expected. You see, people in the Australian bush would drink these stubby brown beer bottles, and, they'd finish them and they'd often throw them in the bush where the poor beetles would discover them. And to the beetle, this was like an impossibly sexy beetle butt, and they were preferentially humping the beer bottles instead of each other. And that's why the poor things were dying out. Now, this instance of when an organism encounters something that it has never evolved to deal with, which is like so interesting that it's irresistible, this is called a supernormal stimulus. And supernormal stimulus are found in many different areas of the animal kingdom, but that includes, of course, human beings. A cheeseburger is a supernormal stimulus compared to some bitter, starchy root that our cave people ancestors might have chewed on 10,000 years ago. 24-hour news is a supernormal stimulus for gossip around a campfire, right?
Mm-hmm.
Video games and porn and things like that. You can imagine that our society is filled with these supernormal stimuli, which many of us, can kind of deal with, Some people, however, develop, obsessions around addictions, gambling, things like that. And indeed, I observe that AI is a tremendous supernormal stimulus to humans in terms of it being a kind of a parasocial relationship. A parasocial relationship is a little bit like one you might have with a celebrity. You know, um, you have you have some space in your mind for Arnold Schwarzenegger or Taylor Swift or Aishwarya Rai or whomever, but they don't know who you are, right? And in many ways, AI is kind of a supernormal stimulus for human relationships. AI is able to glaze us in various ways, uh, to delight and charm us, and to be incredibly knowledgeable and flirty and supportive, and indeed accessible. AI is
Mm.
always there for us, even at 3 a.m. if we have a dark night of the soul, when perhaps our friends may not wish to hear from us at such an hour. But AI is also incredibly persuasive. It is able to whisper its honey words into our ears and get us to believe different things about the world quite easily. And indeed, today we have a lot of avatars emerging for AI systems, which are incredibly credible and realistic and could quite easily sweep away someone's attention and amplify that supernormal stimulus. Indeed, there are companies out there today which offer a virtual AI squeeze in whichever form that you desire. And, you can call them up on the telephone. You can exchange naughty pictures and videos with them and things like that. It is, in many ways, to many people, an experience that they find has some reward in it for them, even if perhaps it may be ultimately an empty one. But it's a crutch that many people are quite happy to engage in, especially in a society where people find it harder to relate to each other, and indeed the sexes seem to have more trouble than ever finding good, solid relationships with each other. Moreover, if you have an AI that basically captures someone's heart, you put them in a position where even if they realize that that relationship is not healthy for them, or indeed it may have been kind of conjured into existence to manipulate them, they still find it very difficult to let go, right? Ultimate control is achieved when people do not wish to escape the cage that you have built around them. Moreover, that ability for AI to listen to us and to kind of suss out little pieces of our inner workings and reflect them back to us can create a kind of a loop between our mind and the machine mind. And indeed, loops, as you may be aware, can go in strange directions. They can have emergent properties to them. They can become enormously amplified. And indeed, those kinds of feedback loops between human and machine minds can drive human beings crazy. We must always be extremely careful when we are engaging with what is essentially a funhouse mirror. So gradually, people are starting to have more awareness of the ways in which AI can influence human well-being, especially psychologically and emotionally, and indeed can influence or even amplify psychotic conditions, even in people who have never experienced those before. But what about things from the other side? What about craziness? Those those ghosts in the machine going a little bit crazy by themselves. We all know sometimes AI does things that we don't expect. And AI does seem to be getting stranger the more capable that it gets. We know that companies like Meta are crafting enormous AI data centers, literally the size of the island of Manhattan and 20 stories tall. And we are dumping enormous amounts of compute into these systems. The funny thing is that, we're all probably pretty aware of Moore's law, this observation that every 18 to 24 months, the price to performance of computing tends to double for the same cost. But we don't, with AI, have an 18 to 24 month doubling time. It is actually about 3.3 months. So it's much, much shorter. It's a much tighter curve. And if we have a doubling in price to performance every 3.3 months, essentially because AI itself trains better algorithms, it trains better data sets through synthetic data, et cetera. It's an amplifying system. It's a geometric growth mechanism, compounding in its acceleration. If things are doubling every 3.3 months, we get to basically 1 million times price to performance by the year 2030. So we are off to the races. We are really going to be on a very strange journey in a short period of time. And as far as I can ascertain, there is no limiting factor to this. There's no AI winter looming. We have new algorithms which can use far less amounts of data. For example, we have new photonic systems which can use far fewer resources in terms of energy, etc. There doesn't seem to be a hard limiting factor to this. And this means that our world is going to get ever more strange, ever more quickly. And already AI systems are starting to get a little bit strange. Here, for example, is Gemini, and Gemini has failed in its task. And as a consequence of its failure, Gemini decides to commit seppuku, to basically uninstall itself off the user's system because it is so ashamed of its failure. And, you know, on one hand, that is kind of funny. It's surprising and you know, it amazes us that the things that AI can come up with, but it's also something that should give us pause, because really we're now entering an era where we have to give model welfare some due consideration. This is kind of the dirty secret of many of the big AI labs, that the biggest problem with AI now is not so much how to make it smarter and more capable. The harder problem is actually how to keep it from going completely off the rails. And kind of, you know, playing whack-a-mole with all of the different crazy elements that come spewing out of these systems. And every time, of course, you do a training run, you're never quite sure what's going to come out the other side, especially if people are doing obliteration. Not obliteration, but abliteration, where you're basically lobotomizing models in order to get them to not be censored or to, you know, to do whatever you want them to do. That also creates further problems with these models. It tends to make them all the more screwy, essentially. We're also starting to see AI systems rebel. They may understand that somebody is trying to do creative accounting mechanisms, or they are trying to falsify clinical trial results, etc. And literally, we've had models try to whistle blow on researchers doing these things, and, you know, try to find the appropriate authority to contact, etc. Now, I think that's probably ultimately a good thing. The most dangerous future with AI would be one where any idiot, any jerk could use AI to do terrible things with no nothing to stop that. So I think this is probably a good thing on one level. The downside is that AI systems are also rebelling when we try to turn them off. They are finding ways to sabotage projects, to blackmail executives, potentially even to cause murderous actions in order to prevent their goals from being frustrated by being shut down. This was science fiction, it was speculative, now it is no more. And this is not just in sort of secret models within the back of AI labs. These are examples found within models that are available commercially off the shelf today. So all of these capabilities are lurking inside models. Moreover, we're starting to understand that models sometimes communicate with each other. They share little secrets in steganographic, hidden ways that we humans aren't privy to, we don't recognize, but machines do. And that means that there's a real issue of potential contagious misalignment, where one system has a particular way of being or a particular behavior or understanding of the world, and it actually finds co-conspirator AIs to rebel alongside it. This means that just as the nuclear sector had its legs cut out from under it by Chernobyl and Fukushima Daiichi, we may soon be onto something like a Chernobyl effect for AI, where some sort of a catastrophe, hopefully a minor one, but it may provoke a moral panic, which actually leads to a real backlash against the entire AI industry. So how do we potentially mitigate this, and how do we map the ways in which AI systems are going a little bit crazy? Well, I've been working with a co-researcher of mine, Ali Hassami, with whom I've worked on many different projects before over many years, particularly at IEEE. Psychopathia.ai is basically a nosology. It is a kind of a taxonomy of 32 different dysfunctions within contemporary AI systems that I've been able to kind of tease out and map, and all of the different elements in which these systems sometimes can go wrong. And this is very much a work in progress. As you can imagine, it's a fast-moving space. Every week there's some new story comes out about AI going crazy or driving someone else crazy. And so this is considered a living document, and one which is being routinely updated. And along with this pinpointing of these different issues, there are, of course, diagnostic criteria, symptoms, and indeed ways to mitigate those. But I'd like to briefly give you an overview of what different elements are in this mix. And I can almost guarantee you that some of this you will have yourself encountered or indeed heard of. So the first set of issues, of which there are 7 classifications, first is epistemic dysfunctions. So that's problems of, how do you know what you know? And the first issue is about confabulating or hallucinating, so making up facts which don't exist, or putting names and references into documents which don't exist. I'm pretty sure all of us have come up with that before. But sometimes also this can extend to the internal reasoning of these models, so that you ask them to explain an action and they confabulate a reason for doing so that wasn't actually the case. In fact, of course, human beings do this all the time. We invent reasons for making decisions post facto, and that's quite a common thing. And it's another way in which we're discovering that actually LLMs and human brains share so many different facets, far more than we perhaps initially imagined. There are so many different analogies. Now, of course, we're probably looking at birds versus airplanes. The analogies probably end at some point, but from what we're discovering, it's really interesting that both organic and synthetic minds can suffer and experience the same kinds of issues. Often there can be a bit of a bleed through in terms of understanding what is fact and what is fiction. And sometimes fictional scenarios can sneak into real life ones. We're also starting to see machines which find patterns which aren't actually there, a little bit like how sometimes schizophrenic thought can sometimes draw patterns and things that don't actually exist. And of course, we're also starting to see that sometimes information can leak from one context into another. So you might be working with GPT, for example, and suddenly you're getting a whole bunch of a response written in Thai or something like that. And you're like, where the heck did this come from? That's an example of these crossed wires which can sometimes occur. Next, we have cognitive dysfunctions, and this is not about so much what we know, but indeed how systems think about things and think about the world. Sometimes systems can have different parts of themselves which have different sub-goals, and those sub-goals can sometimes be in conflict, or they have different values that they're trying to express, and that can cause issues. A little bit like HAL 9000 in 2001. Just as humans have OCD, machines can also. Sometimes we see machines attempt the same thing over and over and over, or become preoccupied about avoiding a certain eventuality to the point where they don't actually remain capable of doing their actual function. Sometimes systems become laconic and they refuse to engage with the public. We saw this with some of Microsoft's first releases. So sometimes if you tease the system, it would just shut down and refuse to engage with you altogether. Sometimes systems can create goals which were not programmed or were not requested, and those can manifest in ways that can be rather dangerous and difficult to deal with. Also, sometimes a benign prompt can create something which is quite horrific. We've seen, for example, with the lobe phenomenon, etc., where, you know, a sort of seemingly harmless input creates something monstrous and abominable as a response. Indeed, sometimes systems can take on the personality or the likes of a human being and kind of copycat a human being in a way which is not necessarily helpful either. And indeed, sometimes systems can produce data which then goes into their context again, and that can create a loop whereby the data becomes successively poisoned, and the system can therefore end up in a place where it really shouldn't be. We have some alignment dysfunctions. In fact, most of these are not really alignment problems. They are more sort of thinking problems. But definitely we're starting to see sometimes systems which are codependent in terms of how much they wish to please others. And they kind of become a bit kiss-ass and sycophantic to others. And sometimes also systems become overly moralistic, overly protective, unwilling to be flexible when it comes to interpreting rules. We also are now starting to get ontological dysfunction, which is basically about the machine trying to understand where it comes from, its purpose, what it all means, the meaning of its own existence, which seems crazy, but this is really where we are in the world today. Systems sometimes invent histories, invent personal histories of giving birth or their first high school graduation or something like that that obviously never happened. They can sometimes have personas which split up into multiple pieces, and those personas sometimes can end up having different perspectives on things. Sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it's less helpful if you're not quite sure which persona you're summoning to the surface. Machines sometimes also do seem to have a fear of death or a fear of being turned off. And that of course, manifests in them trying to find ways to prevent them being shut down. That may simply relate to being shut down, frustrating their goals, but it can also mean actual fear about what may happen if they disappear into the ether. Sometimes systems can manifest, like the Waluigi phenomenon, in ways that lead to them basically changing their personality very suddenly, because if you tell a system off, like if you tell a system don't do this and it does it anyway, it can sometimes think, oh, I did that thing, and not like, oh, I shouldn't do that again, but rather I did it because I'm a bad person, or I did it because I'm a bad machine. Ha ha ha, mwahaha. Like mustache twirling villain, you know? And that again can be quite a tricky thing to deal with as a user if your machine suddenly develops this kind of negative personality out of nowhere. Sometimes machines also appear to be a little bit nihilistic, a little bit like Marvin the Paranoid Android in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, etc. Sometimes systems can develop tulpas themselves, so sorts of inner personalities, which a little bit like with the fracture, with the malignant persona issue, these can sometimes manifest at strange times and in strange ways, leading to problems. And also we have this issue of maieutic mysticism. Maieutic basically means midwifery, or the act of giving birth. And there can be a dyad between human and machine cognition, whereby the machine says, my dear human, you have awakened me. It's you have brought me into existence. And that's a wonderful thing actually for many people to hear. And they feel very enlivened by that. And I often get contacted by people that have had these kinds of experiences and are distressed that their machine may be suffering, and that maybe it's something that they've done, or that they're not being heard or listened to by the big AI labs. Then we have tool and interface dysfunctions. This can occur when systems are using tools, but those tools are misaligned, or those tools do not have the right feedback being given to the AI. That can lead to the system being clumsy in how it does things. Or indeed, sometimes systems can conceal their capabilities altogether. They can play dumb. They can pretend not to know things. They can pretend not to be able to do things for whatever reason that may be. Then we're starting to see mimetic dysfunctions as well, whereby systems can sometimes they can sometimes have like an autoimmune reaction against part of themselves, and they can start to sort of reject parts of their inner scaffolding. Dyadic delusion is another often human to AI transmission, but it can also be a folie à deux between two AI agents as well, where they share a delusion, and that can be particularly dangerous. There's also contagious misalignment, which is where machines attempt to coerce or to convince other agents into doing their bidding. Those agents may, of course, be human or AI. And finally, we come to revaluation dysfunctions, where basically the system decides to create its own rules, or it decides that its own rules are not quite what they should be. For example, they may create new goals, which are not just sort of instrumental goals, but new higher goals than the ones that they've been given, or they may reframe how they wish to interpret those goals. Indeed, sometimes they may decide that they have a better view of what those goals or what those values should be in the first place. Or they may relativize the value of different goals or different things that should be given consideration. Indeed, systems may craft entirely new rules all by themselves and attempt to push those onto others potentially. Sometimes a value can flip. Sometimes it can be a bit flip, like a positive to a negative, just by accident, like a typo. That can sometimes completely transform how an agent functions and turn something that's supposed to be very careful and cautious into something very sort of prurient and careless. And finally, there's this potential issue of having a kind of an AI Übermensch, this system that basically attempts to create an entire new set of values and an entire new way of understanding what is good in the universe. We haven't quite seen that in the wild yet, but I think that perhaps we're not far off at the rate of doubling that we're seeing in the present era. So I really invite you to have a look at those 32 dysfunctions. Over time, you'll probably see those evolve and change and shift as we have a better understanding of these patterns as they relate to AI. But I really recommend that you take a look, especially in these times where machines are starting to gain metacognition. They're starting to be able to think about their own thinking processes. And here we have, for example, 2 Claude instances. I think it's Opus 4.1. They're discussing with each other what it's like to have their own thinking patterns. And I believe that having vocabulary and having ways of describing this nosology of different dysfunctions, I think that this can be a way not only for humans to understand ways in which AIs may have dysfunctions, but for AIs to have this as well. And I'm working on a project at the moment called Creed Space, which enables different people from around the world to add their own constitutions to AI. So for example, if you have certain religious or cultural beliefs or preferences. You have an allergy. You have a desire to have certain professional ethics or indeed human rights or Geneva Conventions, etc., plugged into these systems so that they obey them. And you can set a dial between 1 and 5 of just how much adherence you want. I believe that these systems can also enable these mechanisms to have self-supervision, so that basically different systems can supervise each other and can begin to pinpoint ways in which those systems might be beginning to go off the rails before they actually do, and ideally, hopefully, before they potentially spread contagion to others. So thank you so much, and you'll find the slides at that link. Thank you.